You know, a handful of years ago, an author and pastor, Craig Groeschel, wrote a book with the scintillating title, It. And basically he said, like, nobody knows how to define it, but you can always tell, you know, whether it is present or it is absent, whether someone has it or not. You don't have to be somewhere very long to figure that out. You can go over to the Mosaic place, and I went by there this morning just because, you know, Kelowna Rockets come and visit here every once in a while, and I wanted to see, you know, the home of the Warriors. Well, you don't have to be in there more than 2 minutes most nights, and you'll discover whether the Warriors have it that night or they don't have it that night. It is that, you know, intangible that you can always sense. Well, as a national pastor with Willow Creek, I do get to travel coast to coast. I'm in all kinds of churches all the time. And you don't have to be in a church very long either before you can discover whether a church has it or a church doesn't have it. And so I just want to offer a couple words of encouragement and advice to you. And you say, yeah, he hasn't been on our platform 30 seconds and he's given us advice. That's what we preachers do. And I just want to say, it seems pretty obvious to me. I was here yesterday, I've been here through the morning, that whether you appreciate it fully or not, you have it here. God has blessed you with it. And that is not all that common. It's a rare privilege when you see a church that is on fire. They like being here. You can tell in the lobby, do people like being part of this church or not? Are they proud of their church? Or are they thrilled? Are they expecting to meet God when they come together in their church? And all of those, you know, it sort of come together, and you can feel it when you come into a place. And my word of advice to you is to understand that it doesn't happen by accident, and it is largely connected to the guy that's sitting in the front row right down here. And so just, you know, steward it well and steward him well, because it's God's gift and God's blessing, and really just want to encourage you with that. I also have to begin by telling you something that I mentioned yesterday to the group, and that is that just this week I spoke at a brunch in our home church on Wednesday, and the master of ceremonies, I don't know why, but felt that he wanted to ask the question, how many of you out there are from Saskatchewan? And there's a group of about 300 or 350 people there, and more than half of the people put up their hands, like they're from Saskatchewan. I just want to let you know, like, Rider Pride is alive and well in Kelowna, British Columbia. It's crazy. In fact, it's alive and well in our home. My wife is a Yorkton girl. And so yesterday after our workshop, I went for my run, and then I sought out a sports store. And you just need to know this. I'm going home with a new Rough Rider jersey for her so that she, you know, will, Rider Pride will be there. I want to talk with you today about a crucial conversation. And crucial conversations, by definition, are hard. Truth is hard. It's hard to give. It's hard to receive. I had one of those defining moments about truth a dozen or so years ago. I talk about this all the time. I was invited to give a keynote address at a convention of fire chiefs of Alberta. It was held in the Jasper Park Lodge. And I got no idea how they got my name, but there I was. It was their closing banquet. It was extremely formal. Like here in your church, we never use titles around our church, but there everything was titles. It was all formality, and the master of ceremonies came up. He's in his dress uniform, medals, spit shined, and he literally marched up to me. And he says in this sort of this, you know, officious voice, he says, Dr. Schroeder, he says, with your permission, we'd like to make a small adjustment to the program. And I said, sure, you know, whatever. And he said, well, we had you on first, and now we would like you to close. Well, I was in Jasper. I wasn't going anywhere. So I said, how about you just call me up whenever you want, and I'll be ready, and I'll come up there. And everything went great. It was a wonderful evening, except for one oversight on my part. You see, I am a pastor, and I speak primarily in churches, and so I didn't stop to think when I agreed to this change that I now wouldn't get up to speak until almost 9:30 in the evening, but the bar opened at 6 o'clock. Anybody see where I'm going with this? Best audience I have ever had. Like, they laughed at everything. They were incredibly responsive. When it was over, they jumped up, gave a standing ovation. It was just unreal. I went back to my room at the Jasper Park Lodge. I called home. Arlene, my wife, said, how did it go? I said, sweetheart, it was fantastic. I said, they laughed at all my jokes. I said, they even gave me a standing ovation. Everything just went silent on the other end of the line for a minute. And then she said, "They were drunk, weren't they?" I said, "Oh, ouch." You know, man, the truth hurts sometimes. Which is one of the reasons we tend to avoid it. And it's one of the reasons that I'm really glad that you're here today, because as hard as the truth is, we all crave it deeply. We're going to interact with a great Bible story today. It's a crucial conversation that's found in the Gospel of John chapter 4. You might want to turn to it if you brought your Bible. If you've got a Bible app on your smartphone, fire it up. John chapter 4. In short, this is a story that describes a rather prickly encounter between Jesus and a woman at a well near a town named Sychar. And it's an encounter that turned into a crucial conversation that saw her life completely transformed. And that, incidentally, is why I've been so amped up for the last couple of years about helping the Church of Christ learn to tell the truth better. It's because crucial conversations handled well are a pathway to change lives. Let me say that again. Crucial conversations handled well are a pathway to changed lives. And conversely, to quote Joseph Grenny, who is the author of the book Crucial Conversations, when these hard truth-type conversations, when they're avoided or when they're not handled well, well, he says that's often the reason why lives, marriages, relationships, businesses, even entire churches, that's often the reason why they get stuck. Truth just doesn't get dealt with, doesn't get faced. Conversations like the one in our text today are that important. John chapter 4. Let's just take a look at Jesus interacting with this intriguing lady. And here's how we're going to approach this story. The interaction that takes place between Jesus and this gal, it raises some deeply probing questions. In fact, I'm going to suggest that the way you interact and respond to the questions that are raised in this text are going to influence almost every significant conversation you have in life. And so as we dig into this and as these questions come up, I want you to take each of these questions very personally and very seriously. And I want you to say, like, how would I respond to this question? What does it have to do with me? And together I'd like us all just to sort of inwardly vow that when it comes to truth, we're going to get a little bit better at telling it and receiving it, a little better at handling it. So 4 questions that are raised by this interaction, by this conversation. Here's the first one. It's a big one. Do you believe in divine appointments? And do they happen to you? Is life just happenstance? Are the conversations that you get involved in, are they just the product of circumstances? Or do you actually believe in divine appointments where God brings people together for the purpose of impacting the trajectory of each other's lives? Gospel of John chapter 4, starting at verse 4. Now he, Jesus, had to go through Samaria. And so he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. And Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. And when a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" Now, just at first glance, it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot in the setup to this story, so let's take a second glance. One thing you need to be aware of as you read this is that most good Jews didn't go through Samaria. There's a lot of history behind that, and we haven't got the time to get into all of it, but suffice to say that Jews and Samaritans, well, they're sort of like Albertans and Saskatchewanites. They didn't really like each other all that well. Actually, I can do better than that. They hated each other. And Jesus was on his way from Judea to Galilee, and I'm not sure how up on the geography or the lay of the land you are, but from Judea to Galilee, Samaria is right smack in the middle. It's sort of like if you're going to go from Moose Jaw to Winnipeg, like there's Regina right in the way, right in the middle of it. And because of racial strife, there was this tendency, if Jews were ever to be found in Samaria, a lot of times they'd be attacked, they'd be mugged, they'd be robbed. It just was not a friendly environment. And so most Jews making that journey from Judea to Galilee, They wouldn't go through Samaria. They'd take the long way around. They'd actually go through Perea, which meant crossing the Jordan River twice, but they took it that seriously. They wanted nothing to do with Samaria. They avoided it whenever possible. Just keep that thought in the back of your mind as we look further at this text. The second thing you need to know about the setup to this text is that women didn't draw water alone at the noon hour. First, it wasn't safe for women to usually be out there by themselves alone. And secondly, it was too hot at noon hour. And so the common practice was that groups of ladies would come early in the morning or in the cool of the evening, but not at midday and not alone. Do you see what's going on in this text? We read this story about Jesus and this woman meeting each other at the well. The first thing you notice is that Jesus shouldn't have been there. The second thing you notice is that neither should have the woman. They had a divine appointment. It's a really interesting word in this text in verse 4. It says, now he had to go through Samaria. Literally, from the original language, it says it was necessary to go through Samaria. Not really. Not geographically. He could have gone around like all of the other travelers did. But scholar after scholar studying this text make the point he had to go through Samaria because he had a divine appointment there. There was a woman with whom he needed to have a crucial conversation. And my question is, does that happen to you? Like, through what lenses do you see the interactions in your life? I think we often fail to realize how much is at stake in the exchanges that we have. We think, oh, this is just sort of by chance I happened here or there. And we fail to recognize that God might have set this up, that God might actually be up to something really important in the conversations we have. And so I guess what I'm really asking this morning is, do you actually believe that? That God sets up divine appointments for you? I have to confess, I oftentimes miss it myself. And I don't know whether it's because I'm a Baptist and I don't listen to God very well, or I'm a man and I don't listen to anybody very well, or but I just often miss what's going on. After quite a few years away from it, last year I re-engaged as chaplain to the RCMP. I'd been an auxiliary constable for years, I've been a chaplain for years, and I'd taken a little break, and now I've sort of gone back. And recently we had a regimental dinner, which is one of those Red Surge, very special events. And police officers from all over the southeast part of British Columbia showed up for this dinner. And I ran into a whole group of my old buddies that I used to police with and hadn't seen some of them for years. And so at the break in the evening, we all got together, we're standing around, and they started telling stories, rather embarrassing stories of things I used to do when I worked with them. It was just horrible. And one story that just won't seem to die, I mean, this one's been making the rounds for more than 20 years now. It was when I had just got started with the RCMP. We were having a problem at our church with people coming and stealing the gas out of our church buses. And I was so frustrated. I just couldn't get over it. People were coming and stealing from the church. I just couldn't handle that. And so I actually went and I staked out the churchyard. I mean, how sad is that? Senior pastor staking out the churchyard because they're stealing gas out of the buses. But I did, Detective Schroeder, I'm in there and I'm watching night after night. And all of a sudden, one night I'm watching, and I watch as a car comes onto our property, drives right back in behind the last bus. And I thought to myself, I gotcha. And so I got on the phone and I called, and the police response was amazing. They just came swooping in. There was a coffee shop about 3 blocks away, and a whole group of them had been on coffee break. And they decided, we're not just going to send one car. I mean, this is Tim. And they all came, like 4 or 5 cars, lights flashing, takedown lights on. And they came in the main way. They came around the backside of the church through the industrial zone on the other side. It was just like the movies. And the poor young couple who were making out in their car behind the church bus just never knew what hit them at all. As 20 years ago, they're still giving me a hard time about that. Hey, Tim, I thought you guys were in favor of love at church. What do you want us to charge them with? Kissing on the churchyard? It just won't go away. I completely missed I completely missed what was actually going on. And you know what? I do it not only in the silly things like that, I do it more often than I care to admit in divine encounters. And I don't recognize what God is actually up to. How about you? So I want to nudge you this morning. Do you believe in divine appointments? Do they happen to you? Is it a divine appointment that brought you here today? Something tugged at you on the inside that maybe you haven't been in church in a while or whatever. Something just said, you know what, I think you need to go. Has God got some conversation He needs to have with you today? Maybe you'll have a divine appointment this week. And it could show up in any number of ways. Maybe you'll find yourself in the car alone with your teenager on the way to a game or a rehearsal, and you got 40 minutes. Maybe there'll be a phone call with an elderly parent. Maybe there'll be a negotiation with a tenant or a landlord. And I could just go on and on. Because, church, if God set up a divine meeting over a glass of water at a well on a hot day, it's possible He could set up almost anything for you. I can almost guarantee that any hard conversation you're going to have, any crucial conversation, is a divine appointment. Last year I asked Joseph Grenny, I says, are there moments of disproportionate impact in relationships? And without a moment of hesitation, he said, like, these are them. These crucial conversations where you're trying to work through some kind of a hard truth. He says, man, like, they're through the roof important. Divine appointments. And so evaluate yourself. You don't need to write anything down. Just in your heart and in your mind, rate yourself. Like, do I really believe that God sets these kinds of things up for me? And how insightful am I to recognize them when they happen? Well, let's keep going. That's question number one. Second question that sort of emerges out of this text is this. When you're having one of these conversations, are you committed to get past abrasiveness? Are you committed to keep going? You see, when we're in a hard conversation, a lot of times it gets a little prickly, somebody says a little something, and we tend to run at the first sign of that. Are you committed to persevere when it gets a little bit dicey? Let me put it in a different context. Those of you who are married, when you first started dating the person who is now your spouse, how many of you initially received a less than enthusiastic response from them? You know, you asked her out and she burst out laughing. She said, oh, you? I got to babysit the cat that night. But you persevered. Why? Because you believed she was worth it. You believed he was worth it. So you hung in there. Oh, when did you stop believing that? And I'm not speaking of romantic interest now. When did you stop believing that hanging in there with people to work through and work past the edginess or the prickliness or the abrasiveness isn't worth it? I want you to notice what Jesus did and what He went through in this text. And I'm going to read this with a little bit of an edge. I think it's accurate. I think it's the way it went down. But starting at verse 7. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, will you give me a drink? His disciples had gone into town to buy food. And the Samaritan woman said to him, you're a Jew and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? For Jews don't associate with Samaritans. I saw a t-shirt the other day. It said, I've got an attitude and I know how to use it. I think this gal could have been wearing that. I mean, Jesus was hot and tired. They'd been traveling. It was high noon. There he is leaning up against the well, but he had nothing to draw water with. So it's a pretty logical, reasonable request. How about a drink? And she bursts out with this attitude and gives him a lecture on the racial and gender problems of the day. You're asking me for a drink? You're a Jew and I'm a Samaritan. You're a man and I'm a woman. Oh yeah, strike two. You'll talk to me now. You want something from me? Wow. You know anybody like that? Are you like that? Everywhere you go, you got this edge. Well, you know what? If it had been me instead of Jesus, probably would have been conversation over right there. But Jesus hung in there. He chose to work beyond her abrasiveness, and He took the conversation to a whole new level where He got to talk with her about the gift of God and living water. In Crucial Conversation Training, Grenny says one of the major obstacles in handling these kinds of conversations well, he said it's not the facts of what's going on, it's the stories we tell ourselves about the facts. And so we start ascribing the motives and figure out why this person, and we make up all these stories about why the prickliness or the abrasiveness is going on, and then we react to the stories that we've told ourselves, and we don't even try to actually engage with the person and get to the facts. We just convince ourselves, oh, he's a jerk, she's a jerk, and I'm moving on. A few months ago, I had my bell rung on this one. I hosted a small forum called Ask an Atheist. And this whole thing came about because I write a weekly newspaper column in Kelowna, and to my shock, the atheist community all read the faith column. And I've never understood. Why are they reading the column? Like, they don't believe in it, but they read it, and then they interact, and they respond, and it's usually not real nice, but, they take shots back at me. And so I've just sort of had a tendency to just write them off. Oh, that's just the atheists. They're just a bunch of jerks that put the ads on the side of the buses, and they criticize Christians every chance they get. And one thing led to another. I had this response from the head of their committee, and she insisted I need to come and debate with them on this topic. I'm not here to debate anything, and I'm not here about issues, but we kept on, and finally I got to this one moment where I said, I'll tell you what, I'm not going to debate with you, but I will meet with a group of you. I said, I'll have coffee with you, and I'll share my story of why I believe what I believe, and I'll listen as you share your story, why you don't believe what you don't believe. And so we did that, and it led to me saying, I think this would be valuable for some in our church. And so I invited a small nucleus of mature believers that I knew could handle it, and we invited a small group from the atheist community, and we got together just to hear their stories. And all of a sudden, I had no categories left anymore. The one young man, he talked about how when he was a teenager, his 17-year-old brother took his own life. And his family called their minister to come. And as they were waiting for the minister to come and share some comfort and some hope and some encouragement to them, instead, what happened was their minister showed up, he looked at him and he says, your son, your brother will burn in hell forever for what he did. And the young guy says, I stopped believing in God that night. Well, knowing his story, I can't write him off as a jerk. All of a sudden I see a deeply hurting young man. Not just abrasive. I need to hang in there long enough to hear people's stories. I need to hang in there long enough to see what's going on the inside. I might be the only red-blooded Canadian male who can say that I'm really glad that a number of years ago my dad bought me a doll. He'd been to Russia, and he brought dolls home for each of us kids. And you've all seen them. They're wooden dolls. And you open them up, and there's another doll inside of a different color. And then you open that one up, and there's another doll inside there. And you open it up. There's always something else on the inside if you open it up. Let me say that again. There's always something else on the inside if you open it up. Are you willing to hang in there past the abrasiveness to find out what's on the inside? I said earlier, I think it's advantageous for us to evaluate ourselves on each of these questions. I want to do more than have you evaluate yourself on this one. I'd like you to commit to it. The next time things get a little edgy in a conversation that you're having with your spouse, the next time things get a little abrasive in a conversation you're having with your teenager, the next time things get a little out of line and your coworker gets a little gruff, will you just commit to hang in there to get to another level? Because you might be surprised at what you find is really going on. Question 3. Question 3 just takes question 2 a little bit further. And this one says, are you willing to endure the discomfort? And I probably really should say it's more than discomfort. Are you willing to endure the actual pain of getting through to the heart of the matter? This gal in our story, she got all edgy about Samaritans and Jews. Then she got all testy about men and women. Then she completely misunderstood what Jesus was saying about living water. And near the end of the story, she's going to go off about religious differences between Jews and Samaritans and where the right place is to worship. And step by step, Jesus stays right with her. And he patiently keeps on bringing her back to the heart of the matter. Now, I want to take a quick time out here and acknowledge the obvious. This is Jesus we're talking about, the Son of God. None of us have the same divine insight that he had. But the principle of what he did in this conversation is absolutely brilliant. I mean, just even through human eyes, can you imagine him wondering, why is this woman here at the noon hour alone? And you can just see him mulling that over and say, wonder if she's been marginalized from her own community. Wonder if she's an outcast from her own group. And then, why is she all fired up about me being a man? I mean, 50% of us are. And you can just see him process and the light going on. And all of a sudden he says, hey, ma'am, how about you go home and get your husband, and then we'll talk more about this. Verse 17, I have no husband. Bingo. Now we're getting close. Jesus said to her, you're right when you say you have no husband. The fact is you've had 5 husbands, and the man you now have isn't your husband. What you've said is quite true. And his insight led her to conclude that he was a prophet. We know that he was more than that. He's the Son of God. But the point is, he zeroed in on the place of pain and hurt that was right in her heart. And she still tried to deflect it off course, and she still tried to talk one more time about religious differences between Jews and Samaritans, and Jesus brought it right back yet again to what really mattered, which was the condition of her heart before God. And verse 24 is that verse that we so often take out of context. God is a spirit, and his worshipers must worship in spirit and truth. And he says to her, this is not about Jews, and it's not about Samaritans, and it's not about Jerusalem, and it's not about Samaria. Ma'am, this is about you. This is about your heart before the Father. And he worked through and disarmed racial tension and gender tension and marital tension and religious tension, and he got all the way to her heart. That takes some work, and it's often extremely painful. And I just want to ask, are you willing to pay that kind of price? Is it worth enough to you to get to the heart? Dan said, I've been studying karate for a while. I have for about the last 7 years, and I'm just far enough along that last little while I've been at a level where I'm able to instruct some of the very junior members in our club. And a while back I was instructing some white and some yellow belts in a particular defensive technique that involves, and somebody comes at you, you apply an arm bar and take them down to the ground. And if you do it right, it's actually a very painful technique. I could show you if you wanted. It is, it's a very painful, and I was trying to teach this technique, and I just wasn't getting through to them. And I showed them over and over. I gently tried to apply it on them, and it just wasn't working. And one of the students in our club is a delightful young man. He's a yellow belt at the time, and he's in his late 20s, and he's got Down syndrome. And our sensei, who's a wonderful Christian man, has agreed to teach him because of the value to his own physical movement and everything in life. And so he was one in this group, and he just wasn't getting it at all. None of them were. And so finally, I just got so frustrated, I was ready to give up. And so I called one of the senior black belts over, and he was instructing a group next. And I said, Senpai, I says, can you come and just show these students how this is supposed to work? I says, I'll be the guinea pig. I'll be the bad guy. Just show them what this looks like when it works. And so I made an aggressive movement towards him. And 1.2 seconds later, I was flat on my face on the ground with my arm painfully extended, my elbow on the verge of dislocation up towards the sky. And I'm laying there, and it did hurt. And I'm right down on the ground like this, and I open my eyes, and I see the face of this young fellow, my young friend with Down syndrome. He's about 8 inches away from my face, and he's looking at me like this. And I open my eyes, and he's got a smile from ear to ear, and he says, so, how does that feel? And all of a sudden, I realized what was going on. I realized why none of them were doing it. It wasn't that they couldn't figure out how. They didn't want to. The heart of the matter is they knew it was going to hurt, and they wanted to avoid the pain. Now, let me just take a quick detour for a moment. I just want to say I'm so proud of him. This is my young friend. If we've got this picture coming up. That's Matthew. And I worked with him for about the last 6 months and had the privilege of coaching him through for his orange belt test. And you can see that he actually passed, and he got his orange belt. And I just sort of want to say to you who think that you can't do certain things, if he with his limitations can do that, the sky's the limit for you. So don't give up too easily. Now, that's got nothing to do with this talk. I just love young Matthew and what he's accomplished. But back to our story. If you're going to get serious about holding crucial conversations well, if you're actually going to invite the truth from your spouse, if you're going to invite honest responses from your teenagers or your coworkers, you better expect it to be painful sometimes. You're going to hear things about yourself. You're going to have to deal with things that are not easy and are going to hurt. But that's the pathway to truth. And you need to decide if you're willing to go there. All right, last question. Question number 4. Are you clear about the goal? Here we are at the end of the story, and I'm now just getting to the goal of it. Like, what was this conversation all about? This is one of the most familiar texts in the Bible. You have heard this taught again and again and again. What was this story about? Was it about Jews and Samaritans? Was it about men and women? Was it even about water? Was it about religion and the right place to worship? Was it about her marital status? Verse 25, after some religious dialogue, the woman said, I know that Messiah, called Christ, is coming, and when he comes, he'll explain everything to us. And then Jesus declared, I, the one speaking to you, I am he. Verse 28, then leaving her water jar, the woman went back to the town and said to the people, come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Key phrase, could this be the Messiah? Could this be him? Everything else in this conversation was just part of the pathway to her discovering the truth about Jesus. From the first moment he asked for water to the moment in verse 32 when his disciples came back and offered him food. And he says, guys, you're missing it. This isn't about food. I got food to eat. I got water to drink that you know nothing about. This conversation is about one thing and one thing only. It's to help one disillusioned lady find the truth about her life in relationship to me, in relationship to Messiah. And I think the single biggest obstacle to crucial conversations being held well is the tendency that many of us have to forget why we're even having them. We sort of think this is like the books you buy in the airport about how to negotiate so that you can get what you really want. This isn't about learning to argue better so you win. This is about truth and life in the kingdom and relationship with Jesus Christ. A number of weeks back, my cell phone rang. I was working on a message in my office and phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, so I just said, hi, this is Tim. And the gal on the other end said, this is so-and-so from such and such an optometry place. And she said, there are 2 males in the store who are causing trouble and they're scaring our clients. She said, I don't think they're stealing. They're just causing quite a disturbance here. Well, when you're in your office at church working on a sermon and you get a phone call like that, and I had no clue what was going on, so I said, ma'am, can I ask a really dumb question? I said, like, who did you think you're calling? And she said, isn't this our security company? I says, no. I says, this is Tim Schroeder. I says, I'm a pastor at Trinity. I says, I suppose I could come down and pray for them if you want. You know, and she just burst out laughing and she says, oh, I'm so embarrassed. I'm so embarrassed. I said, no, don't be embarrassed. I said, you made my day. I didn't tell her she also made the sermon, but she made my day. And we kibitzed back and forth and she kept apologizing. And finally, I was the one. I said to her, actually, I said, like, I better hang up so that you can phone security or the police. And she goes, oh, I forgot. She got so embarrassed and flustered by her mistake, she actually forgot the reason for the phone call. You know my favorite part of this whole story? Did you see it? The gal comes out from town with her water jug to draw water, and she left her water jug behind. She forgot why she'd even come. Because she found something so much better. She found the ultimate reason for her search. She encountered Jesus Christ, and she left all the rest of it behind. That's the goal. We need absolute clarity on why we're sharing truth with people. It's not just to help life go a little smoother. That's part of it. But ultimately, this is about life with Jesus Christ. Crucial conversations handled well are a pathway to changed lives. They involve divine appointments and our insight to recognize them, our sensitivity to the Spirit to recognize them. They involve our willingness to not give up too easily, to get past this little prickliness and abrasiveness. It involves our willingness to endure the pain, to get right to the heart of what's actually going on. And it involves that we remain crystal clear on what the goal is. How are you doing on this? Is today a crucial conversation between you and Jesus? Is that why He nudged you to even be here today? Have you got one coming up this week? Your marriage, your job, your family? Crucial conversations handled well are a pathway to change lives. And I hope and pray that as each of us embrace the truth a little bit better, we might see the maturity and the change in our own lives, and it might have an impact in the lives of those around us. God bless you, church, and Pastor Dan, will you come?